There is a strange moment that happens sometimes when you're talking to certain people. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but you feel it immediately. The conversation feels steadier, slower. Not awkward, intentional. They listen without rushing to reply. They don't interrupt the silence. And somehow, without trying, they make you feel more grounded just by being there. You may not be able to explain it, but your nervous system notices before your mind does. At first, you try to label it. Maybe they're introverted. Maybe they're just relaxed. Maybe they're not glued to their phone like everyone else. But those explanations never fully work, because what you're sensing isn't personality. It's not temperament. It's not even attitude. It's something deeper, something quieter. It's timing. Specifically, the psychological timing of when their nervous system was shaped. People who grew up in the 1990s didn't simply live in a different decade. They developed during a transition the human brain had never experienced before. They learned how to exist in the world before constant stimulation became unavoidable, and then, while their identity was still forming, the world accelerated around them. The rules of attention, connection, and presence changed in real time, and they had to adapt without a manual. So what you're picking up on isn't detachment, it isn't nostalgia, and it definitely isn't disinterest. It's regulation, a nervous system that learned how to settle itself before everything became loud, before every moment needed commentary, before silence started feeling uncomfortable. They learned how to be with themselves before learning how to broadcast themselves. That's why their presence feels different. They don't fill every gap with words. They don't rush to signal engagement. They don't confuse constant responsiveness with connection. Their attention feels anchored instead of scattered. And once you recognize this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee, because it shapes how they talk, how they listen, and how they move through relationships long after childhood ends. People born in the 1990s occupy a psychological position no generation before or after them fully understands. They are not purely analog, and they are not truly digital. They grew up in the narrow space between the two. Their early years unfolded in a world that moved slowly enough to feel solid. If you wanted to see someone, you planned. If you wanted information, you searched patiently. If you missed something, it was gone. Time wasn't compressed. Attention wasn't fragmented. Life didn't demand constant availability. Then the shift happened. Not gradually, but fast enough to destabilize the rules they had just learned. Technology didn't knock. It rushed in. Speed became expected. Being reachable became normal. Visibility became a form of currency. And this generation had to adjust while their sense of self was still taking shape. This is what it means to be a bridge generation. A bridge doesn't belong fully to either side. It exists to carry weight between them. People from the 1990s learned to switch codes constantly. They can move comfortably through digital spaces, but they still feel the absence of depth those spaces can't replicate. They understand convenience, but they remember cost. They value progress, but they remember what was exchanged for it. Living between worlds builds flexibility, but it also creates tension. They are fluent in two systems that operate by entirely different rules. And that tension doesn't just show up in how they use technology, it shows up in how they experience time, how they approach relationships, and how they regulate themselves internally. They were never meant to choose one side. They were shaped to carry both, quietly, often without recognition. To understand why they feel different, you have to understand that they learned presence before performance. They learned how to sit in a moment without documenting it. They learned how to exist without an audience. And that early training still lives in their nervous system today, shaping how they listen, how they pause, and why their silence feels steady instead of empty. For people who grew up in the 1990s, childhood unfolded without a record button. Moments did not come with a pause feature. There was no instant replay waiting online. If something happened, it lived once and then disappeared. Saturday morning cartoons couldn't be rewound. Conversations weren't archived. Embarrassing moments faded instead of being preserved forever. Joy existed fully in the moment because there was no expectation that it would be captured, shared, or validated later. That environment shaped something subtle but powerful inside the nervous system. Presence wasn't a mindfulness practice. It was a requirement. When moments can't be saved, the mind learns to stay. Attention settles naturally instead of being pulled into multiple directions. Experiences feel complete because no part of the brain is holding back, wondering how this will look later or how it will be received by others. This isn't nostalgia, it's psychology. A nervous system that develops without constant observation learns how to be internally anchored. It doesn't need to perform awareness to feel real. Later, when technology introduced endless documentation, this generation already carried a different baseline. They could use the tools, but their sense of presence didn't depend on them. Silence didn't feel empty. Moments didn't need witnesses. Their attention wasn't automatically split between living and recording. That early environment trained a quiet kind of focus, one that stays with what's happening instead of constantly projecting forward into representation. Boredom played a role too, one that's easy to underestimate. In the 1990s, boredom wasn't something you escaped instantly. There was no endless feed waiting in your pocket. No algorithm rushing in the moment stimulation dropped. When boredom appeared, it stayed. And that forced a choice. Sit with the discomfort or create something internally. Games were invented. Daydreams expanded. Inner worlds developed. Over time, this did more than spark creativity. It trained emotional self-regulation. When there's nothing to distract you, the nervous system learns how to settle itself. It learns that discomfort rises, peaks, and fades without immediate relief. That skill becomes foundational. It allows a person to be alone without panic, to wait without agitation, to feel restless without needing to numb it. Many people don't realize how rare that skill has become. Today, boredom is often treated like a failure, something to eliminate immediately. But for this generation, boredom was a teacher. It showed them that inner life could hold attention on its own. This is why many people from the 1990s don't fear quiet the way others do. Silence doesn't signal emptiness, it signals space, and space invites thought. Waiting reinforced this pattern even further. You waited for movies to arrive at the video store. You waited for your favorite song to come on the radio. You saved allowance money for weeks to buy a single CD. Desire didn't lead directly to fulfillment. Time existed in between. Psychologically, this shaped delayed gratification, but more importantly, it shaped trust. Trust that wanting something doesn't mean losing it if it isn't immediate. When rewards arrive after effort and time, the brain learns that waiting is survivable, even meaningful. This carries into adulthood. People shaped this way often approach goals differently. They tolerate the middle phase where progress feels invisible. In relationships, they don't rush intensity or force connection. They allow bonds to form without constant reassurance, not because they care less, but because urgency isn't driving them. In contrast, a culture built around immediacy trains the nervous system to interpret delay as rejection. When everything is instant, waiting feels like loss. But for those raised earlier, waiting never meant absence. It meant process. This explains why many people from the 1990s can sit with uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety. They learned early that not everything unfolds on demand. Some things ripen. That lesson still echoes today in how they commit, how they persist, and how they move through decisions that can't be rushed, no matter how fast the world becomes. People born in the 1990s didn't just adapt to a changing world. They witnessed the moment it changed. They remember when communication had boundaries, when calling someone meant speaking to whoever answered the phone, when being unreachable was normal, not suspicious. Privacy wasn't something you managed in settings. It was the default state of life. Then, almost suddenly, those rules dissolved. Messages became instant. Availability became expected. Silence started to feel like something that needed explanation. The world didn't just speed up. It began watching itself constantly. Sharing shifted from an option to a quiet obligation. And this transition happened while their identity was still forming. They were old enough to remember what was lost, but young enough to be reshaped by what replaced it. That created a unique psychological tension. On one side, they carry a memory of slowness, depth, and unobserved moments. On the other, they live inside systems that reward visibility, speed, and constant response. Moving between these worlds requires constant recalibration, often without language to describe the strain. This is why many people from the 1990s feel a subtle discomfort with modern exposure. Not because they reject technology, but because they remember a time when life didn't need an audience to feel complete. They understand the convenience of connection, but they also feel the cost. They aren't resisting progress. They're holding the memory of another way of being. One of the most misunderstood traits of this generation is their relationship with silence. From the outside, it can look like distance, a pause before responding, comfort with gaps in conversation, a lack of urgency to fill every moment with words. But this isn't emotional absence, it's emotional fluency. Silence was part of connection long before constant stimulation existed. You could sit together without speaking and still feel close. That early experience trained the nervous system to stay regulated without constant input. At the same time, they became fluent in digital communication. They know how to move through screens, platforms, and virtual spaces. They understand timing, tone, and presence online. They aren't technologically behind. They're bilingual. They can switch between depth and speed, presence and performance, engagement and restraint. And because of that, their quiet often carries intention. Adaptability is often praised as a strength, and for this generation, it truly is. But adaptability has a hidden cost. When you grow up learning to handle things quietly, you also learn to minimize your needs. You become skilled at self-regulation, but less practiced at asking for help. You absorb pressure internally instead of signaling it outward. Over time, resilience becomes visible while strain remains hidden. Many people from the 1990s are mistaken for being low maintenance, emotionally steady, unbothered. But that perception often overlooks how much they carry internally. Because they adapted early, they rarely announce when something is heavy. They simply adjust. Being fluent in two psychological worlds can also mean fully belonging to neither. They understand the pace of modern life, but feel subtly out of rhythm with it. They remember depth while operating in systems that reward speed. This creates a quiet sense of displacement that's difficult to explain. They aren't disconnected. They're managing complexity. Others see competence and assume ease, but inside, there's often fatigue from constant recalibration. Strength doesn't remove weight, it just teaches you how to carry it silently. Many people born in the 1990s share an unsettling feeling they struggle to name. It isn't burnout. It isn't pessimism. It's the sense of having lived through more than their age suggests. They often feel older than they are, not because they grew up too fast, but because they witnessed a world disappear while they were still learning how to belong in it. They remember when life moved at a human pace, when attention wasn't constantly fragmented, and then, within a single lifetime, those rhythms dissolved. That kind of transition leaves a psychological imprint. It creates maturity without bitterness, awareness without cynicism. They don't chase every new trend, not out of resistance, but discernment. They know how quickly the new becomes normal, and how quietly the normal disappears. This isn't a story about one generation being better than another. It's a story about timing. People born in the 1990s aren't slower than the world around them. The world simply learned how to move faster. What shaped them wasn't superiority, it was contrast. They experienced life before constant visibility, then adapted when visibility became unavoidable. If you recognize yourself in this, there's nothing you need to fix. You're not behind. You're not out of place. You carry a rhythm formed in a different environment, and it still serves you, even if it doesn't match the pace around you. And if you didn't grow up this way, understanding it changes how you interpret silence, patience, and restraint in others. What looks like distance is often balance. What looks like slowness is often steadiness. And what looks like quiet is often a nervous system that learned how to stay grounded before the world forgot how to pause.